I'm really pleased that we could do this, and I'm very excited about it. And again, from a historical perspective, this is one of the biggest things that we've done for African Appalachia in the 22 years that we put an exhibit together. And thanks to Rose Center, and thanks to Sylvia and Jan Peters. The Peters.
Invited we are to do this. I'm so happy to see so many of our friends and fellow art lovers, and really very touching. This collection that you're seeing, that my husband and I have put together, is truly a love story. It's about our love for each other. It's about our love for people who create things and make things. Our interest in the visual arts, our love for the visual arts, and our love of collecting art in sculptures, baskets, glass objects, fine china, clay objects, functional and non-functional art began with our love for each other. So my remarks today are deeply tempered and influenced by a relationship and a marriage that has been in existence for more than 40 years. We're fortunate enough to have met and dated each other in a 5-year period that extended from 1965 to 1969, when we were both young teachers at Richard Bird School in Chicago. In that time, we struck up a friendship, but before that, we divorced our spouses. Started dating and eventually married each other in 1969. This collection that you're seeing today has been built by 2 people who love each other and love artists and all things made by them. When we married in 1969, we married in August, and later that month we went to a street fair. Chicago is known for its art street fairs. In fact, the oldest one in the country started in Hyde Park, more years than I can remember, and I probably was at the first one. We were so proud of a painting that we bought it. It was by Dale Norman, and it's not on exhibition here. But Dale Norman was part of the Norman family that lived in my neighborhood as a child. And we paid $28 for it. And we were just thrilled that we had $28 to buy this lovely acrylic oil painting because it depicted the street where I was raised. And way back in the background, you could see my father leaning on a fence, looking down the street. I knew every stroke of that painting. I knew where the streets were depicted. They were dug up and pipes laid so that we'd have better sewers and things like this. And my friend Dale Norman had put all this into this painting. And so we were so proud of that painting. That was our first painting, and we took it home and hung it up on the wall. And I said to this man that I loved more than life itself. Do you think we can start purchasing more art? We were 2 young school teachers. We didn't hardly have 2 nickels to rub against each other. But he said, his answer was, I don't care what you buy, as long as it's by African-American artists, and it's beautiful. And that's been the guiding light of this collection. Since that time, we have learned to collect from everybody. In fact, the lady back there shooting the camera off. We buy her art because it's just so beautiful, and things that we love. Margaret Hayes, we have Akira Blancs dolls. We now have just, it's awful. But I think God has blessed us. I think God has blessed us because He knows that we will take care of it, and we will make sure that it's disposed of carefully. And due to Patty, I've started really trying to archive it. It's a desperate move because there are things everywhere. Will Kaiser said, if you just do one room, it'll help out. But we've been really lucky. We actually saw at this same street fair Steve Walker, but we couldn't afford Steve Walker's paintings. His paintings, he had just graduated from the Art Institute of Chicago, and his paintings were in the $100 to $200 category, and that was not even a reality for us. I took his contact information and I thought about the large painting in the room as you walk in of the Red Lady. When I first saw that painting, it was pale green and pale blue and yellow and tan. When I saw it a year later again, it was vibrant red like it is today. And many times artists, and I guess they still do, art materials are very expensive. I mean, if you use things, just imagine, that painting has endured for 40 years and it's in very good shape. So you have to use good materials. And in those days, African American artists simply didn't have the money to keep buying materials. And so in order to do things, they would often paint over pictures, experiment with different kinds of things. And so when I saw this painting next, it was a vibrant red. It's very, very beautiful. I love the painting because the woman, the African American woman, was a calm, sophisticated, and powerful individual sitting in an extremely very classical pose. The woman is educated, thoughtful, and flat out elegant. Seated in her space, gazing at those passing by. She is still a powerful woman constructed of grits, gravel, sand, and coffee grinds. He had painted over the original thing and taken grits, gravel, and all this stuff and pressed it into this painting. Yet she still is quite sophisticated and powerful. No particular individual features are shown in the painting, as you've noticed. She has classical hands. And I've looked at this picture for years. I've caught people sitting in the pose. I've looked at women, and it doesn't make any difference who they are or what color they are. You can still see them just kind of like this. It's so wonderful. She can be named any woman. Steve Walker has made his living as a commercial artist at Walgreens drugstores for the past 40 years. He attended the same elementary school that I did in the high school, but of course he's younger than I. His family attended the same church as ours, and he went to Inglewood High School. Charles White, the great African-American artist, taught at that high school, and the school had a reputation for turning out gifted students. Richard Hunt graduated from Inglewood High School. Steve Walker, to name a few. He went to the Art Institute of Chicago and graduated with a degree in fine arts. He started his career as a commercial artist. Walker was influenced by the explosive social, cultural, and economic forces that were shaking up America at the time. The paintings that we're showing you here at the Rose Center reflect the time when Steve came out of school and he was very idealistic, very romantic, and etc. We also have some paintings at our home that are very, very difficult to handle. His palette from 40 years ago is relevant today and forceful today as it was then. One can see the same palette that you see in that woman, the same large features, the same kind of stylistic ideas. You can see them in the homes in South Africa. You can see them in the outer walls with the huge paintings that they have on their homes. And there is definitely, I'm sure, even though Steve has never been to Africa, there is that kind of intuitive, instinctive palette that is transferred through our culture from Africa to America. Steve's work represents universal blackness. universal Pan-Africanism, universal American Africanism. The works that we're sharing you with today represent a particular period. He was fresh out of the Art Institute. He was influenced by the idealism of Picasso in a way, even though Picasso did Guernica and other kinds of strong things. There was a kind of idealism in some of Picasso's works, and I'm sure that Steve was influenced by it. You'll look at some of these things and be reminded of Cubism. You'll be reminded of rock and Mondrian. And as we came to know Steve more, he became more influenced by what was happening at that time in Chicago. You know what was happening? Detroit, Birmingham, and the Black Power movement throughout the nation. We have a remarkable painting at home of his of 3 slave ships bringing our brothers and sisters from the homeland. We also have a fabulous collage that depicts the rage of young people in the streets of the ghetto. But the items in this exhibition are the ones that have moved our hearts and adheres to the admonition that my husband said. Just make sure it's by an African American and that it's beautiful. The next artist that we're going to think about, pick up my little piece of paper here, and I don't want to talk too long because I want to go on and walk with you through the gallery. The next 2 artists that we're showing here are Mr. Carter, whom we knew, we met him at another street fair. Mr. Carter taught art at DuSable High School, which is a very well-known African-American school in Chicago. These 2 men, Mr. Carter and Brad Jones, were supported by and spurred on by the WPA project of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They were members of a group of people who gathered together at the former Comiskey Mansion on 38th and Michigan Avenue. It was renamed the Southside Community Arts Center. The center was dedicated in 1940 or 41. It depends upon whose history you're talking about, because you know, as time goes by, there's always revisionist history. So you look and you see different dates. But this center was dedicated by Elaine Locke, who was an African-American art historian and a Rhodes Scholar, and Mrs. Franklin Roosevelt. And the dedication of this building was carried on the radio in those days in 1941. The dedication of the center formed the basis of establishing emerging black artists in Chicago as a force in the world of African-American artists, a world that formerly was dominated by New York, Harlem, Renaissance-type people. Many great African-American artists have passed through the Southside Community Arts Center, and till this very day, it holds the distinction of being the only one operating art center that remains from the WPA period, thus making these treasures that are being exhibited in the next room even more remarkable and more remarkable records. And as I think about that, I'm really encouraged by this exhibition. I wanted you to know that we at one time turned down the Art Institute of Chicago from coming into our home to view these works because we didn't want people to know that we had them. In fact, when we were in New Orleans a couple of years ago, someone asked us about Fred Jones, and we even told a little story because I didn't want people to know that we had probably the largest collection of his work in the world. I just never have felt, and neither my husband and I, it's sort of a thing with us, if we buy it, we own it. We never got into this for money. Money has nothing to do with it. And as poor as we were, money couldn't have done any. And right now, we're not thinking about selling any of these things, although I think we could sell the Fred Jones collection and the Carter work for a lot of money. We are not interested in that. We are interested in this work purely for a historical record and what it means to us as African American people. So no, things are not for sale. They will go to, and we have some museums that are interested, but we will probably, when we die, send them intact to some place where they can be seen by people and studied, because we have worked so hard to keep these things intact. And while I'm thinking about it, I want to thank my friend Robert. Robert runs Bennett Gallery. And when we were trying to get this thing together, you know, to keep these pictures in order cost a lot of money. And I went over the other day and I said, well, just stick something on some of these. And they so graciously reframed 7 of these items and really did museum quality work at very nominal cost because they too feel like this is a public service. And so it continues our interest in making sure that this work stays in sort of like the public domain. William Carter was a Chicago public art teacher for many years. He was also a fixture at many of the art fairs that started in Chicago. He studied in St. Louis, the Art Institute of Chicago, and he taught at the Southside Art Center. We didn't meet Mr. Carter until early 1980s when I made a critical decision to quit my position as teacher. And I started to work for a company that had been started by the University of Chicago and then was picked up by IBM. And I was a sales consultant, knowing nothing about sales. I knew a lot about consulting, but I went into this business. And behind this kind of calm exterior is an insane competitive maniac. And I got into this job and found out that money could be made if you knew how to work your territory, your sales territory. And that at the end of 6 months, if you competed, and at that time there were only 3 women in the whole field force in the United States, and I was one of them. There were about 90 men. And I figured out how to do my job, and lo and behold, started making lots of money. And at that time, we were able to make a critical decision to take every bit of money that was made as bonuses in this sales business to invest in art. And so, and not a lot, but I mean, it was a lot considering that my husband said, I took a $12,000 pay cut. We had just bought a new house. And then went and started doing all this work, and then to make a conscious decision to take the money that you have and invest it in art is really something, and that's what we did. This pushed our ability to buy art up quite a bit. And at that time, the bonuses enabled us to make investments in Charles White, Jacob Lawrence, Romare Bearden, and Richard Hunt. We were also able to purchase the art by Mr. Carter, that's being shown in the next room. His work is beautiful. That's all that can be. It's just technically, it's skillfully executed and just a joy to own. I mean, it really knocks my soul when I can just walk by and see one of Mr. Carter's paintings. To me, it's the most delicious thing in life. The picture of the gentleman and the woman sitting at twilight. It's got to be twilight. Just sitting there. They might be lovers, but definitely good friends. Just chatting. Oh, what a beauty. There's another large painting by Mr. Carter that was created for us because we saw him somewhere, and he had this magnificent oil painting of some kind of blues something or other, and we wanted to buy it. And somebody with much more money than we had at the time came right by, snapped it up, and it was gone. And of course, I cried. So months later, I went to visit Mr. Carter, and there she was, the blues singer with the piano band. And he said, I just had to paint this for you. And so it's a painting that's very personal because, again, it's something that is about a part of our lives that we remember in those days. Frederick Jones, the next artist, of which I'm sure we have the largest collection. I believe there are 28 or 30 or something like that hanging in there, and there were more under the bed and more everywhere. Frederick Jones was born in Georgetown, South Carolina, and was raised in Atlanta, Georgia. He studied art with Hale Woodruff. And if you know anything about African American art, Hale Woodruff is one of our huge icons. And Hale, you can see the work you can see the influence of Hale on his painting. particularly linoleum cuts, because Hale Woodruff would do a lot of linoleum cuts. And Hale Woodruff was extremely influential at Atlanta University. The Coca-Cola people, thank God for them, realized that at some point in American history, African-American art would be something that everyone would have to reckon with. And the president of Coca-Cola, president of the board, recognized that Fred Jones had all of this talent. He was at Atlanta, he was studying with Hale Woodruff, and he sent him to the Art Institute of Chicago, because this was a place that was beginning to recognize and understand in the major scheme of things that this was magnificent art, and these were very talented people. He went on to study in Chicago and had some jobs around Chicago and did some kinds of things, but eventually went back to Atlanta and became a commercial artist for the Coca-Cola Company. When I met Fred Jones in the early 1970s, he had moved back to Chicago, and I went to, again, street fair, and found some friends there, and I said to them, oh my God, there is only one artist here. And I had everybody at the street fair going over to Fred Jones' stall. And Fred was just beginning to work with enamels. And I purchased on time, you understand what on time is? On time, 2 of the first enamels that he had ever rendered. And they remain today 2 of my favorite. I paid $35 for one and $65 for another. At the time of Fred's death, which was sometime in the late 80s, Jan, in the late 80s, his enamels were, if you could find one, were going for $2,000 and $3,000. They remain priceless now. Our connection to Fred Jones was that of mentor, supporter. I won't call ourselves patrons because we didn't have any money. But every time we bought something from Fred, which was frequently, Fred would rush out and buy some more materials, do some more artwork. And I would say to Fred, how about doing a little larger enamel? How about making some furniture? How about carving a sculpture? I even have a sculpture at home that Fred did. I said to him one time, how about getting back and starting to paint some of your big things? Because he was very discouraged by the fact that there were no venues for African Americans. Can you imagine these people with all of this huge talent? Mark Chagall had visited Fred Jones when he'd come to install a thing in Chicago and had deemed him one of the finest artists that he knew in the world. And to have all of this kind of cachet around and presence, but still not to be acknowledged. So we used to support Fred by buying brushes, enamels, paints. We spent hours upon hours just talking with Fred. He was a crafts person. He was meticulous. He paid attention to detail. His wife was a tap dancer. She cussed like a sailor. But they loved each other, and all of his women looked like Jean Jones. She was a big, strong, raw-boned woman. Fred had been born in South Carolina, and he spent a small amount of time in the Navy. But his background from that town in South Carolina, he talked about the times when the fishermen would come in with their catches and everything like that, and how poor the town was. They would take the shells from the oyster and grind them up with a mixture of stuff, sort of like cement, and pave the streets with this stuff. And so then you would get the reflection of these oyster shells, the iridescence quality shining up through the street. So many of the enamels that you see in there and the acrylic paintings have little flecks of things in the background and in the streets, and that's from his raising in Georgetown. We found his work inspiring. I mean, how many of you like art and have art in your house? Why do you have it there? How many of you have art? Raise your hand, let me see. Why do you have art?
Because I can't paint, I'm not an artist.
You're not an artist.
Hired by somebody who can.
And so you admire that work.
Yes.
Some other reasons why you have art in your house. Why do you have art in your house, my dear? I know you have a lot too.
So, I don't know. What did you call me?
You know why we have art in our house? Not because I'm not an art historian. I've been taking a few classes from Margaret so I can understand why people paint and to understand. I paint China. We have art in our house because we can't live without it. We just can't live without it. And it's been that way. We have moved. At age 52, I became a senior citizen gypsy. And had the nerve to start moving around the country to various and sundry places. I lived in Los Angeles, Atlanta, Baltimore, New York for a couple of days. I lived everywhere. And Knoxville. And you know, Knoxville is a very unlikely place for anyone to live if you're African American coming from all this urban stuff. But in Knoxville, we found our home, we found our friends, we found our connection, and we love Knoxville. And so we had brought all this art with us to Knoxville, but wherever we went, we would take a few paintings that we just couldn't live without. And I'm going to show you those paintings in the next room as we move on. But we were so inspired by Fred Jones. We were so connected to him that we are more than honored to be able to show all of them today. What has inspired us to have these paintings and to know that because of you here at the Rose Center, you have encouraged us to really do the thing that we ought to do, and that is to really document these things. I'm happy for the young man who's documenting with photographs. We will begin to jot down all the things that we know. We will begin to show the catalogs that we have. And I only have one of these, but this collection was shown earlier at the DuSable Art Museum in Chicago. I'd forgotten all about it. But this constitutes the provenance of this art. This constitutes part of the story that is known. I need to go through it and talk about how I know each one of Fred Jones's works were created. Because behind each painting there is a definite story. A definite story that enhances the notion that my husband first started 40 years ago. I don't care what you buy. Just make sure it's by an African American and it's beautiful. So walk with me to the next one. Coming out of his kind of romantic idealism, decided that he would cover up these kind of delicate colors and put down these reds and orange. And this one really typifies the kind of African palette. These are remarkable flowers. And he mixed all of his colors with gravel, grits, coffee grinds, and sand. This was one of the first things that we bought from Steve Walker, and it was one of our first $200 paintings. Back in those days, $200 was a humongous amount of money to pay for a painting. These three paintings here, and here's my dear sweet friend over here. I haven't seen her in so long, I have to hug you. How are you? Oh, it's so good to see you. These three paintings are studies that he did of fruits and remind me sort of very abstract kind of modern stuff. But I love them, so I had to have each one of them. This is more cubist and than the other ones, and they are kind of abstract renderings. This is a very typical young woman of the 60s and 70s. Again, a powerful figure, but elegant and beautiful. This one was red when we first saw it and was painted over blue. This one is called Acquainted with Grief. And even though she is acquainted with grief, she's still an elegant, dignified, powerful woman. I love these paintings. This is one right here that we can never live without. Wherever we've gone, as our senior citizen gypsies, we've had this painting because it's so powerful. It speaks to me of African Americans being in love. And the way society goes now, a lot of times people don't think of us as people who love, people who are so grounded in our emotions. And so we've always had to have this one. This one, I literally took it away from Steve. And I think this is the beginning of him getting into the social statements. This is a pair of blue jeans. And it's really just, you know, the laborer, the worker, the kind of thing. And it's a beautiful, beautiful image. All of his works speak to his ability as a graphic artist. There are 8 of these paintings at home. We have in our collection probably 25 to 30 items by Steve Walker. We have a whole series of other oil paintings. We have a series of prints. We have a series of silk screens that he's done that are just extraordinary. And in one gallery, I call them that, and we have all of Charles White's prints about slavery. And then we have this huge oil painting by Steve Walker of 3 slave ships bringing people from the motherland. And it's quite a statement. And we couldn't deal with that material for years because it didn't adhere to the adage, as long as it's by African Americans and beautiful. But when we moved to Knoxville, we finally put those things up in a gallery, and it makes a statement by itself, just that exhibition. These are the works by Mr. Carter. And here's the one that I just love this, The Conversation and The Friends. And then this is Discussion in the Alley Talk. This is the one that he did for us, and he said, she reminds me of you. And in those days, and I always still wear flowers in my hair. I had a fro, I'd have a flower stuck in the back of my hair. It's just something that I've always done. And this is another one that has traveled with us wherever we go. And people will always walk in and say, it's amazing how people react to your art. A big old burly guy walked in and said to me, that looks like Billie Holiday. And I said, I wish. These are the remarkable linoleum cuts by Fred Jones. And this is, to me, representative of the great influence of Hale Woodruff. These are remarkably difficult to do because you just have to get that linoleum and that ink and everything cut right. And you'll see that there were limited editions of these things, and they've held up very, very well. They were among some of the first things that we bought. We also have some original pencil sketches by Mr. Jones that we really, really value. I mean, that makes them just extremely beneficial to historians. This is the Black Lady Godiva, which I encouraged Mr. Jones to paint. I said, Fred, you got to paint something different. As soon as he would start painting something different, I would buy it, and then lots of other people would buy it. We always, as soon as we bought one thing, it was the first of that particular genre, and then others would start buying it. And Mr. Jones was really a remarkable man. He was able to market his art in New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and even on the West Coast. So he was able to really make a tolerable living toward the end of his life by marketing his work. And once he became known for his enamels, life really took off for him. But I'm going to show you the first one that he made. This is called Carolina Promise, which I love. You know, he would always say that this was this young man putting his heart on the line for the love of his life, and this is after they had married and gone on to their Gothic light, and you can see the stained glass windows. A lot of this was done first, and then he started to work on his enamels and things, and you can see these things represented in his enamels. These are pen and ink drawings. This is another one that I really love, and I talked about his life with the fishermen and everything like that. You'll see a lot of symbolism. Fred was an educated person, and he understood literature and things, and you would see a lot of literary representations in his work. This was one, a very large enamel that he started to doing, and we paid $65 for this because he had to have some materials right away. And he was doing all of these things at his home. He had a kiln set up to make the smaller ones. This was a small one. But then he got a kiln that could take one this size and then that size. And he was always telling us about something that was going on in his life. This one is called the Unicorn, and it was given to me for, I believe, my 35th or 40th birthday. What you ought to do is to go around and study the detail in these enamels and understand how difficult it is to control this, and to control temperatures, and to control the powder and the undercovering that you have to do this work. It is extremely difficult. Even now, I don't know a lot of people. There's a woman named Susan Schleppian who's doing enamel work in Maryland. I don't know of too many people who are doing enamels of this particular size even now. And think, he was doing these back in the 70s when chemicals and the things that artists go through in order to make their work phenomenal. We just didn't know all of the things that might happen to one's body. And Fred died eventually of diabetes, but I am sure that also some of the chemicals and things that he was using in doing his work contributed to his death. And so I am just so proud and so happy. Thank you, Patty, Rick, and Sammie. My husband, I call my husband Sammie too, so now we've started calling Sammie, my Sammie, Sammie 1, number 1, and Sammie number 2. And I'm so pleased to have all of you here to hear about this work and to share it with you.
Thank you.
I thank you so much.
But it's an etching technique that you use with etching
I
on
think
the plate.
the last things that we purchased were the pen and ink drawings in the early 90s. And so most of this work is from the early 70s through the late 80s.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to